everybody, and welcome to our second session in our series titled, There is Hope. In our first session, we studied about how Jesus took his disciples outside of Israel and met a woman in Phoenicia, and she demonstrated great faith as she acknowledged and cried out emotionally who Jesus was, acknowledged who she was, and acknowledged her need for him. She surrendered her will to Jesus' plan, and Jesus did great miracles. So let's continue on. After they left that area, they traveled north, farther away from Israel, and I'm sure the disciples are wondering, oh my goodness, here we go farther into an area that is as anti-Jewish as can be, but they went up into the area of Tyre, and then they traveled eastward around the northern rim of Israel, and they come down the southern direction as they were east of the Jordan River in a region called Decapolis. Now, Decapolis was a very unique area in the way that it was all Greco-Roman cities. These cities were founded during the time of Alexander the Great, and if you were to walk into those cities, which you can see the ruins of those cities today, they were marvelous cities, large streets with stone columns and tapestries and tile and beautiful architecture, very much unlike the typical setting in Israel. And as they were going through the area, Jesus would begin to teach, and people would bring sick, lame, blind people to them, and he would heal them. And he wouldn't spend a lot of time teaching, apparently, but what he was doing is he was expressing his incredible desire to meet people in their human need. He loves people. And in this travel, he come across a man that had no hearing, and he was mute as well. And in Mark chapter 7 and verses 31 through 35, he has a discussion with this man, and he literally puts his fingers in his ears, and he spits and touches his tongue, and he cries out, "Be open!" He looks up into the Heavenly Father and says, "Be open!" And the man is immediately healed, and everybody is amazed. And what does Jesus do after that? He says, "Don't tell anybody." And the reason for this was he wasn't interested in becoming popular with the masses, and he wasn't interested in being promoted as a leader among the people and becoming the king. Now, Jesus is the king, and he's the king of the Jews, and he will reign from Jerusalem, but the time was not yet. In fact, it still hasn't happened yet. What Jesus was trying to teach his disciples and those around him was watch and learn. And that's what we're doing in this series. Watch and learn. And I want to encourage you, as we continue to talk about all these occasions, notice what's common. Jesus is common. He's teaching profound truths. He's teaching to Gentiles who have very little background or understanding who he really is. But there's the other group. It's his 12 disciples that are following him and going everywhere with him. And as we're going to continue to show in this series, the purpose for the travels, the purpose for the teaching was to prepare his disciples to be ready to minister when it was time for him to go back to heaven. I want to ask you to put yourself in the position of these disciples as we consider this study. Now we get to Mark chapter 8 and starting at verse 1. It says, "During those days, another large crowd gathered." Now they're still in Decapolis. "Since they had nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples to him and said, 'I have compassion for these people. They have already been with me 3 days, and they have nothing to eat. If I send them home hungry, they will collapse on the way, because some of them have come a long distance.'" His disciples, I'm sure they were looking at each other going, "But where in this remote place can anyone get enough bread to feed them?" Now listen to that. Just a matter of months ago, Jesus performed a miracle similar to this. It was a group of 5,000. They were in Capernaum, and Jesus had been teaching about spiritual needs of his people. And this occasion, there's a group of 4,000 men, plus women and children. You could say maybe 16,000 people are there. They are hungry. He is concerned about their physical need. And that's the thing about Jesus. He is concerned about your spiritual need, and he's concerned about your physical need. And they are now wondering, where are we going to get bread? As though they just got amnesia or something. Whenever Jesus said, let's feed the people, they just need to look to Jesus and say, okay, how do we feed the people? Because he is the bread of life. No wonder that he calls them on another occasion men of little faith. So he tells them to, how many baskets do you have? He asks them. They said 7, and he says, all right, feed them all. And he performs the miracle, and after they're done, they pick up 7 baskets of extra food at the end. Very similar to the feeding of the 5,000. In fact, I find this intriguing. As Jesus was wrapping up his ministry to the Jews in the area of Galilee, the Galilean ministry, he ended with the feeding of the 5,000. As he's wrapping up this tour that we're talking about, as he's ministering to the Gentiles, he has the feeding of the 4,000. It also reminds me of 9 months later, when he ends his ministry in Jerusalem, he has the feeding of his disciples at the Last Supper. I find that intriguing. He commemorates the end of a great occasion with a special meal. Well, let's continue on. When the Pharisees and the Sadducees found out that here's Jesus, he's back into the region again, and he's performing miracles, and we just can't have this. So in Mark chapter 8, starting verse 10, we see that they come after him again with their rapid fire questioning, and they're saying, if you really are God, give us a sign from heaven. And Jesus teaches them something that a good old country boy could appreciate. He begins to challenge them, saying, you know, you look into the heavens, and when it's red at night, you know that that's going to be special weather, good weather. And when it's red in the morning, storms are coming. When we were growing up, we had the old saying, red at night, sailors delight, red at morn, sailors take warn. He says, you can determine the signs of the color of the sky to determine what kind of weather it's going to be, but you can't determine who I am or why I'm here. He says, oh, I'm going to give you a sign, but the sign that you're going to receive is nothing more than the sign of Jonah. And he was referring, as on other occasions, about the 3 days and the 3 nights of Jonah being in the whale. And he just stopped there. And as he left that scene, he warned his disciples. He said, beware of the leaven. Now, they didn't understand, again, that problem with being men of little faith. They looked at each other and said, oh man, did we forget to bring the bread? I mean, what's he saying? Is the bread going to go bad or going to spoil? Now, Jesus is aware of the discussion in Matthew 8:17. And he asks him, he says, why are you talking about having no bread? Do you still not see or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Do you have eyes but fail to see and ears but fail to hear? And don't you remember? Now, he's really being hard on his disciples. Why? Because a good teacher will always push his students. Can I just pause here and remind you, if you're going to be a disciple of Christ, let him push you. Now, we've entitled this series, There is Hope, and I'm assuming you're probably watching this series because you're in a situation in your life where you need hope. You need to see hope. And stick with us because we're getting ready to take this series on to some real mountaintop experiences. But before that, may I just encourage you, whatever situation you're in, whatever he has allowed to come your way, or whatever it is he has intentionally brought your way, I promise you, if you're a disciple of Christ, he allows these things to come to you so that you can be developed, that you can be trusted with more, and you can give him greater glory. And what could be wrong with that? So here's Jesus. He's rebuking them because they don't pick up on every word that he says. And that's a lesson to you and I. When we're reading the Bible the first few times and it just doesn't ring to us, he's saying, wake up. I have expectations for you and I want you to achieve certain things. Let him develop you and don't ask for shortcuts. Don't ask for shortcuts, because if you don't fully learn the lesson, that means you got to do it again. Let's just learn the lesson and allow whatever trials he brings our way. Allow those trials to fulfill. So he says, look, in Matthew, he finishes the story and he teaches them. He was teaching them about the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the Herodians, and all those who were teaching false doctrines. It was 90% right, but they would twist in just a little bit of humanity because it's a little more pleasing to the ears, or it gives a little bit more power or audacity to the speaker. He said, be careful. Be careful of this leaven, this spreading decay that can happen with bread. He says, be careful of false doctrine and hypocrisy. We never want to be judgmental of somebody else, of something that we can't or won't do ourselves. And that's what the Sadducees and the Pharisees were guilty of. And he said, be careful, because that leaven is working. And it's even working in the midst of his disciples at that very moment, because they're still debating and arguing even after this occasion about who's going to be greatest in your kingdom and who gets to sit at your right hand and how can this be more for us. They're still being selfish. I confess, when I began reading the Bible for the first time, I was guilty of trying to find out how God could help me with my plan. And that's natural. But as we grow in being disciples of Christ, I encourage you, allow yourself to find out where you fit in his plan rather than how he fits in your plan. He's not a genie in a bottle that's ready to rescue us whenever we're in dire needs. And that's what this series is going to teach you. There is hope for those who develop that intimate relationship with Jesus Christ. And that is what he's doing with these men. So they have now left the Decapolis area. They've gone back to Capernaum, probably for a short stay to spend time with their families. And now he takes them right back out of the region again. He's going up the Damascus road, and I'm sure they're asking themselves, oh my goodness, where is he taking us now, and why does he take us to all these places, and what object lesson are we supposed to pick up on next time? And as they're traveling through the area, they go by a fishing village by the name of Bethsaida. And Bethsaida was one of the three cities that he had cursed, Capernaum, Chorazin, Bethsaida. He said, all you want is miracles. No more miracles for you guys. And as he's traveling in the area, there's a man that they recognize as blind, and he wants to see. And Jesus says, well, come on out of the city, because he promised no more miracles in the city. And he brings the man out of the city, and he spits on his eyes, and he uses his hands, and he works with his eyes, and he says, now can you see? And he says, I see people moving around like trees. And he touches him and he performs it again, and blind eyes began to see. He healed the man's blindness in such an intimate way. I mean, Jesus always gets involved in our lives. When he's going to do miracles, it's usually very up close and personal. And it may not fit all of the norms that you have. I mean, it does. It sounds disgusting that he spit on his eyes. But if you want to be healed, do you really want to put limitations on what Jesus would do? It might get messy in ministry. It might get messy in healing, but he is the only one that can make blind eyes see. Now, as we continue in this journey, remember the focus group here is the disciples, and I'm going to prove that to you in our next session. All of this traveling is about his disciples, and he's exposing them to real-life situations so they can have object lessons to learn. He's watching blind eyes open because that's what he's wanting to do with his disciples, that spiritual blind eyes will become open, and they're going to be in just a few days. It's coming. How about you? spiritual blind eyes becoming opened. Well, they continue north out of Bethsaida, and they head to this area that to me is one of the most favorite places that I visit, and it's called Caesarea Philippi. Now we see this in Matthew in chapter 16 and verses 13 through 20. We know a lot about this area. It was formed as a religious cult worship area back during the age of the Greeks, and it was named Panias because there was a large worshiping temple for Pan, or the Greek god that preceded Pan. And you remember Pan, this creepy guy that's half four-legged goat and half human being. And you remember what he did? He played? Yeah, he played the pan flute. We still call it the pan flute today. And what that was supposed to do is supposed to incite all kinds of fear and confusion in enemy armies. And he would send the enemy armies into panic. Yeah, we still use the words today. There was a huge temple for Pan. There was also multiple temples for all of the popular religious cults at that time. It was in an area that was carved out at the base of Mount Hermon. And the reason it was here, it was considered to be in ancient times a supernatural place. Why? Because there was an issue of water. I mean, a huge spring, one of the four springs that forms the Jordan River, comes out of the base of this mountain. And before people understood geology and tectonic plates and things like this, it was a mystery. Where did all this water come from? It had to be supernatural. Maybe it was issued from hell, and that's where the Grotto was developed. It was a worship center for Pan, and it was called the Gates of Hell. And whenever things weren't going well in the region, they would throw babies off of a cliff into this grotto to see if the blood would eventually surface out of the spring or not. It was child sacrifice. It was horrible. It was wretched. Debauchery, not only in child sacrifices, but in sensuality, in temple prostitution. All these things are going on here. And we know a lot about it, not just from the writing of the Greeks and the Romans, but you can even look at this coin. Here's a coin that shows an imprint of what the temple of Pan looked like. It was very well known. It's recorded in history. And Jesus takes his disciples to this place on the northern rim of Israel. And can you imagine? It's going through their minds going, of all the places in the world, why? Why would Jesus take us to this wretched, wretched place? Well, it says that as Jesus brought them to the boundary area of that region, and when you're traveling up from the south, you can see it afar off. You go up over a rise, and you can see it probably, it's almost a half mile off, and it's very large, and it would have been appropriate somewhere right around in there that he stopped them. And it tells us in Matthew chapter 16, and it's recorded in the other Gospels too, but he asked a question. Here they are in this setting where everybody's got their false gods, their false dead gods that they're worshiping, and he gets right in that setting, and he stops his 12 disciples, and he says, who do people say that I am? I love that question, because here we are in a place where people are making money by selling idols and coin exchanges and selling all kinds of indulgences and everything. And in the middle of all that, the true living God, the only real God, stops and says, well, with all this going on, who do people say that I am? Well, the disciples answered with some good answers. They said, well, some say that you're one of the prophets that's come back from the dead. Some, Jeremiah, Elijah, okay, that's good. But then he asked a more pointed question. He said, who do you say that I am? Peter makes a confession that goes down in history. I believe it shakes the portals of heaven with joy. And it is the most profound answer to the most profound question that any human being will ever ask or answer. Who do you say I am? Jesus asked. And Peter says the right answer. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Not like these dead gods over here. The Son of the living God. And Jesus answers abruptly and he says, blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah. So he called him by the name that his parents gave him, his physical parents gave him. He said, for it wasn't flesh and blood that taught you these things, but my Father which is in heaven. Peter's confession was the result of a divinely regenerated heart. I got to tell you guys, the answer to that question determines a person's eternal destiny. According to the Scripture, that is the gospel message. What the woman at Phoenicia said, that was the right questions and it was the right answers. What Peter just now said was the right answer. He said it exactly right. I ask you, before we go any further in this study, who do you say Jesus is? If that's your answer, you have hope. If your answer is, you are the Christ, the promised one that the prophets said were coming. You are the Son of God that come to redeem and rescue sinful man. You are our only hope. The reason you came was to provide yourself as a sacrifice, as a replacement for me. Now, if a lot of those things don't make sense to you, stick with us, folks. We're just going to continue to learn in this study. And I encourage you, join us. Come join us in our own Bible studies or worship with us here at First Baptist. You will be welcomed, very welcomed, and we encourage you. Come and join us. And I challenge you to ask hard questions. Come and ask the hardest questions you can come up with, because I promise you, if Jesus is who He says He is, and if we have studied His Word, we will show you the answers that He provides. So we're going to pause there with this very pointed question. Now, as we go on in our next session, we're really going to pick up the pace and we're going to see some of the most marvelous things that ever happened. We're going to understand the foundation of the church. We're going to understand the return of Jesus Christ in all of His glory. We're getting ready for a real mountaintop experience. So stay with us and we'll see you next time. And remember, folks, there is hope.